one that certainly there's a lot of controversy and a lot of anger and a lot of drama around it. I'm, of course, talking about the Orange Bowl that will be on December 30th. It's a 4 o'clock Eastern game, which I think is kind of interesting. Always think of the Orange Bowl as a night game, great crowd, loud crowd, maybe a few beverages before the game, but there's NFL that night. So it is a 4 p.m. Eastern start. Obviously, number 5, Florida State, number 6, Georgia. Georgia is a 14-point favorite in the DraftKings Sportsbook. The over-under set at 44.5. Now, coming into this game, you don't need me to tell you what this is all about and what the storyline is. And I think what's kind of crazy is, Mike Norvell did a press conference earlier in the week, just so people know I'm recording here right before Christmas, so about 8-9 days before the game. And Mike Norvell did a press conference where he said the wound is not healed. Like, we're still mad about this. And so obviously there's a lot of controversy, a lot of conversation about the fact that Florida State is not in the college football playoff as an undefeated ACC champion. We've been down that road. We're not going to relitigate it, but understand that Florida State is still mad. Now, it is worth noting from the Florida State perspective, there have already been a few opt-outs, and we're frankly probably expecting a few more. From the Florida State side, best running back Trey Benson has opted out. Best DN Jared Verse, right before I started recording, has opted out. He's probably a first-round draft pick. Johnny Wilson, the wide receiver, has opted out. No word yet on Keon Coleman, which is kind of interesting. But on a positive note, I think you do get back that second-string quarterback in Tate Rodemaker. The third stringer, of course, was playing in that ACC championship game. Kind of interesting from the Georgia side of things. There was kind of some anger from them as well following the announcement of the playoff 4. Now, after the SEC championship game, Kirby Smart went to the podium. If it's about the 4 best teams, you got to include us. I don't even think Kirby Smart really believed that. But obviously, the Florida lawmakers are kind of suing the NCAA or suing whoever. I saw some Georgia lawmakers get in there. But now Georgia has to regroup. Obviously, they're not changing the college football playoff this year to include these teams. And Georgia has to regroup, and they're kind of in an interesting spot. I think from a positive perspective side, Carson Beck is not only playing in this game, but he announced that he's coming back. But on the negative side, by the way, as far as opt-outs are concerned, kind of interesting. Brock Bowers hasn't officially announced one way or the other yet. Kind of get the hunch he wants to play. So we'll see what happens there. But I will say, Georgia's depth has taken a little bit of a hit as they have had 18 different players enter the transfer portal since the season ended. I don't think it's anybody that's earth-shattering as far as how this game gets played, but it is worth noting Mekhi Muse, their star skill position return guy, is out. Brock Vandagriff, their backup quarterback, is out. God willing, knock on wood, nobody's wishing ill will towards Carson Beck, but if something happens to him, you got to go to the third stringer, Gunnar Stockton. And just a lot of the depth on this team was kind of sapped by the transfer portal. Now, in terms of this game itself, listen, if you listen to a show like this, you've probably watched Georgia a bunch this year, and you certainly have watched Florida State, at least in that ACC championship game where they could not move the ball. And I do think, to me, there's two very interesting, very divergent questions in this game. The question, pretty straightforward, is as follows. The questions to me are pretty simple. One, how does Georgia do against what is actually statistically the best defense that they have played all year? We'll get to that in a minute. And of course, can Florida State move the ball at all against an elite Georgia defense that, again, has NFL dudes all over? And so from the Florida State being able to move the ball on Georgia perspective, I'll be honest, I don't think there's a lot of new ground to cover there. Florida State's offense without Jordan Travis, it just was not very good. I went back and looked at the stats. I was kind of blown away by just how bad it was, okay? So in the 2 games that there was no Jordan Travis, remember, Tate Rodemaker did, in theory, at least play in the first game at least a little bit. In those 2 games, let's see here. The Florida State offense had 232 yards of total offense against Florida, 219 yards of total offense against Louisville. So they averaged about 225 or so yards, give or take. So that offense is not good. Now, it's worth noting a couple things. One, Rodemaker is expected back, and it was a little bit better with him than Brock Glenn, the third stringer. He did play well against North Alabama. Does that count for anything? An FCS team compared to freaking Georgia? I don't know. But I will say a couple other things. Some of the backups are really good players. Toa Feely, the backup running back, he was actually a bigger part of their win over Louisville in the conference championship game than Trey Benson was. Trey Benson's really good, but Jay Toafili, the backup, had 110 yards rushing in that game. So they've proven they can run the ball with or without Jordan Travis. And then from the Georgia perspective, let me say this. Everyone spent so much time focusing on how awful Florida State's offense is, and it is awful. I was not one of those people that thought that Florida State really deserved to be in the college football playoff. Top four. I don't think you can argue they were one of the four best teams in college football without Jordan Travis. But what I did say coming out of the ACC championship game, Florida State fans, before you get mad at me, yell and scream, throw stuff at your screens, throw your TV out the window, however you're consuming this content, I will say this. When there was talk that Florida State would get in over Bama, I did say after the ACC championship game, I said, everyone's so focused on the offense. The defense is really, really, really good. And I said, if Florida State is that number 14, they won't embarrass themselves. Like, there have been teams that go to the college football playoff and just get embarrassed. Michigan State a few years ago when they played Bama. Cincinnati, with due respect, did not belong on the same field as Bama when they played them. And I said with Florida State, if they get in, they won't get embarrassed because the defense is so good. Now, I don't know if the offense can move the ball, but the defense is really good. And that's what I think isn't getting talked about enough in this game. Georgia's really good, but they aren't as elite across the board as they have been. Specifically, they don't run the ball very well. Carson Beck was so good that I think it got a little overshadowed that the run game really did struggle for Georgia this year. They finished the season 41st in rush offense, which, again, part of it is the quarterback play was really good, but part of it was the run game was not good. Georgia is coming off the worst performance of the year in the SEC championship game, and it is worth noting, against the best defense that they played all year, the Alabama Crimson Tide. And so in that game, they had 321 yards of total offense. It was their lowest output of the entire season, and it was against the best defense they played all year. Why am I bringing it up? It is because statistically, Florida State was actually better than Alabama was this year on the defensive side of the football. And I know what everyone will say, oh, it's the ACC, everybody stinks. And I can't argue that the ACC was very good this year. But it is worth noting that LSU game to start the year, that LSU offense that nobody in the SEC could slow down. Jaden Daniels won the Heisman Trophy because he put up, even in losing efforts, he was putting up 40, 50 points. But, puts up 49 points against Ole Miss. Puts up, whatever. It was 28-28 when he got hurt against Bama. You go on and on down the list. This guy scored out everybody. They could not move the ball against this Florida State team. And so when I look at this game, Georgia, I think everybody's just handing them this game on a silver platter. I think this Florida State defense is going to be ready. I think they're going to be focused, and that leads into my pick. This is a betting pod. If you're watching, whatever. Bottom line, if I had to make a best bet in this game, what I would say is my best bet is actually the under of 44.5. I know it's not sexy. I know it's not fun. I do think Georgia wins this game, but I don't think they just move the ball up and down the field on this Florida State team. This Florida State defense is real. It is worth noting, by the way, the kid, Patrick Payton, the elite edge player who went on Twitter and said, I'm transferring, sorry, Knoll Nation. He's back with the team practicing, and most of that defense is rested and ready to go. There will be no Jared Verse. But I bring it up, by the way, for people who are watching this individual clip as opposed to listening to the pod. We recorded this right before Christmas. So again, there might be some new information about opt-outs, but I just bring it up to very simply say this defense is going to come ready to play. My official pick is Georgia 24, Florida State 14. But my best bet, if I was going to the window and making a wager, it would be the under.